Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ideas for Tomorrow.
Good evening. Our guest today, Indra Nooyi, is a trailblazer and a role model for millions of women and girls around the world. As the first female CEO of PepsiCo, she transformed the global food and beverage company, positioning it for success and sustainability in the 21st century. Now in retirement, she's just as busy. She's teaching and training future leaders. She's writing a book. We'll hear about that as well. And her strategic advice is helping her home state of Connecticut. Here's a video to tell you more.
Smart, confident, and driven, Indra Nooyi is considered one of the most powerful and influential women in the world. She has led a multi-billion-dollar global brand to exceptional growth and international recognition, and is known as a leader willing to take risks to advance stakeholder capitalism. Born Indra Krishnamurti, she grew up in Madras, India, where she defied traditional roles by playing cricket and rocking out in an all-girl band, encouraging that fearlessness. Nooyi's mother instilled the belief that she could grow up to be whoever she wanted. She went on to graduate from Madras Christian College and then earned her MBA from the Indian Institute of Management in Calcutta. With a global perspective and a need to understand its place in business, Nooyi came to the United States in 1978 to attend the Yale School of Management. Over the next 14 years, she gained corporate experience at several firms. And in 1994, the executives of soft drink giant PepsiCo took notice. As chief strategist for the company, Indra Nooyi faced the challenges of being its first female executive. Rising through the ranks, she urged PepsiCo to reshape its brand identity and assets. Nooyi's redirection, called Performance with Purpose, introduced healthier products while leaving a positive impact on society and the environment. Part of that plan included establishing a culture encouraging workers to stay with the company. Indra Nooyi embraced a personal connection, writing letters to employees' parents, thanking them for their child's contributions to PepsiCo. In 2006, Nooyi was named CEO, becoming the first woman to lead the company.
She has a strategic skill, the commitment to getting things done, and that international focus.
Under her leadership, sales increased by 80%, and philanthropic and community initiatives expanded. After 24 years at PepsiCo, Nooyi retired in 2018. Her legacy there continues, though, as PepsiCo aims to prepare the next generation of leaders, investing $100 million to support the education and empowerment of more than 12 million young people worldwide. Currently, Indra Nooyi is the class of 1951 chair for the study of leadership at West Point, where she helps the Academy develop its cadets into leaders of character. She is also a member of the board of directors of Amazon. As the coronavirus pandemic presented new challenges for businesses, Nooyi put her strategic skills to use, working on a plan for the careful easing of COVID-19 restrictions to reopen her home state of Connecticut. And to help students during the crisis, she and her husband Raj donated 187,000 scholastic books to Connecticut schools. With her keen intellect and strategic thinking, Indra Nooyi is a dynamic leader, motivating and inspiring the world to rise above challenges, to see beyond the bottom line, and to create a better future for all.
Welcome, Indra, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me, Tom. It's a pleasure, a privilege to be talking to all of you.
Yeah. Well, your life story is truly inspirational. You grew up in India before coming here to the United States, as we saw in a video, for your postgraduate education. Can you speak a little bit more about how your upbringing in India and within your family has shaped your career path and personal views?
Great question, Tom. You know, I am a product of the 50s and the 60s because I was born in the 50s and went to school through the 60s and early 70s. I grew up in the south of India in Madras, now called Chennai. And I grew up in a family where only two things mattered: education, just get good grades, and respect for elders. Just two things. As long as you studied hard, got good grades, and you respected your elders, you were left alone. Otherwise, the appropriate punishment was meted out. So you never questioned because everybody in your peer group grew up exactly the same way. What was interesting about our family, I have an older sister and a younger brother. A younger brother is much younger than me. I had parents and grandparents who believed that women should be given the same education and opportunities as the men. We were never differentiated, just because we were discriminated because we were women. We were pushed to study as much as we wanted to. And once I finished with the Institute of Management in Calcutta and I started to work, nobody stopped me from working. In fact, it was expected that I would work. And what was surprising, now that I'm writing the book, it's even more surprising to me. My grandfather, who was a product of the late 1800s and the early 1900s, was so progressive. And my father and my mother were so progressive. And there was never a debate that we wanted to work or study. It's always, you better study. You better move ahead. And it was always pushing us to do this, with one exception. My mother was also part of the society, and she was never given an opportunity to go to college, even though she's incredibly smart. But society expected her to get the daughters married off at age 18. So she would always threaten us saying, if you don't get good grades, if you don't do well, I'm going to get you married off at age 18. So she had one foot on the accelerator, one foot on the brake. But I think the accelerator foot went just a little bit harder than the foot on the brake. And we helped her with it. My sister and I were okay as students. But I'm a product of my upbringing. Let me put it that way.
Was that upbringing in your family that was so progressive? Was that something usual or unusual in the society, in the community where you grew up?
Remember, India only got its independence in 1947. I was born in 55. So just, 8 years after independence. So once, I entered school, it was, hardly 10 or 15 years after independence. So India is a young country, and India is trying to figure out its education system. It's trying to figure out the role of women in society. My generation was the first generation where women really started to go to professional colleges. There were women's colleges in the South. South was much more progressive than the north of India. There were women's colleges in the South. There were women in medicine, some women in law, but mostly women did postgraduate degrees to become teachers. So what was unusual is that they allowed us to go to business school, both my sister and myself. On the other hand, I think when they allowed us to write the business school exams, they were so sure we wouldn't get in because hundreds of thousands of kids write the exam, but they only take about 6 women in each class because the dorm room is only 12 rooms. So 6 for the first year, 6 for the second year. And they were so sure we wouldn't make it. And once you got in, they're like, oh my God, getting into these schools is like getting a Nobel Prize. We can't hold these girls back. So my sister was allowed to go to one of the business schools. I was allowed to go to the other. And they even paid for the tuition. So it's a big positive. So I think it's, the times, the fact that the country was trying to figure out what to do with women, smart people. And when you have a progressive family that's willing to support you and push you along, it's a good time to be growing up.
But when you managed to get through such a fierce competition and get a top level education in India, I'm curious what drove you to pursue further education in the United States. How did that decision come about?
It's interesting. First of all, I want to confess one thing. I was not a top student. I was not the nerdy type. I would do everything that you would not expect somebody of my background to do. I was not dumb. I was not a brilliant topper. I was somewhere in the top, but not the ultimate topper, which caused a lot of consternation in my family. I would climb trees and fall down and break my hand. I played cricket with the boys, my brother's friends, even though they were much younger. I played in a rock band. I did everything that a good South Indian girl does not do. And everything was within a framework. My parents gave me a framework and said, that's all the boundaries. You can have as much freedom as you want within this frame. But you step out of that, we take all your freedoms out. And those freedoms had nothing to do with the US because they were more restrictive, a lot more restrictive, but I was just happy they gave me that. But the times that I was growing up in India, the US was always the beacon of hope, the beacon of innovation, beacon of culture, the real driver of global thought and excitement in the world. I had a lot of friends who'd come here to go to master's degrees, and they would all call and say, look, I'm glad you're doing well in India. I'm sure you'll do well. But really, if you really want to understand global business, if you really want to know, the origin of all of those ideas and cultural transitions, the place to be is the United States. And there is no other way to come into the United States then in the late 70s than to go to school. And rather than repeat an MBA, I found the newly opened Yale School of Management that actually provided a wonderful blend of public and private management. I'd read about it in a Newsweek article at the US Consulate Library, fell in love with the concept, applied. Again, my parents were so sure I wouldn't get in, so they sort of laughed it off. And then I get in, and now they have to decide whether to send their daughter. And by some luck, they allowed me to go. The rest is history.
Yeah, that's absolutely remarkable. But then how did you find yourself in PepsiCo? So you went through the Yale School of Management. That was
Yes.
yet an additional step in your educational pathway. Then you must have decided, well, this is the country where I would like to start my professional career. How did it all play out?
Once you've come here and you get hooked, it's just, people don't realize how awesome this country is. I mean, it is truly amazing. There's a great line which says, if you open the gates of this country and allow anybody to come in, there'll be a long line, okay? We tend to look at the negatives, but there's lots and lots. The positives outweigh the negatives by 99-1. So I just want to say that for the record. Once I graduated from Yale, I went on to the Boston Consulting Group. And I was a consultant for 6.5 years. And I saw lots of industries, lots of clients in the Midwest. I was in Chicago. I just got married, met my husband, and got married in the US. And I loved business. I loved strategy. I loved the way you analyze problems, have a framework to think about companies and problems. I would have stayed a consultant for a long time, except I was in a terrible car crash. There was no Cleveland Clinic near us at that time, so I didn't get awesome medical care. I got good medical care. And I decided to hang up my boots as a consultant because I was incapacitated for about 6 months.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And I got hired by Motorola at that time. So I went to work in Motorola. I was there for 4 years. And with the person who hired me into Motorola, I went to work for Assia Brown Boveri in Connecticut. We moved from Chicago to Connecticut. And I was in ABB for 4 years, and PepsiCo came to ABB and pulled me out of there. And basically said, we need somebody with a very different mindset, an international mindset. There had been no international person on the executive floor at PepsiCo, and definitely no women. And so the fact that they got all in one package with a consulting background, I guess sort of intrigued them, and they came after me quite hard. And there's something about PepsiCo that hooks you. We talk about bleeding blue when you come to PepsiCo. And when you come here, walk in through the doors of PepsiCo, you just fall in love with the place. And that's what happened to me. I was hooked in 1994. I'm still hooked even though I'm retired.
So can you speak a little bit about what it actually means to bleed blue? I just assume that this is a phrase that describes something that is oftentimes difficult to convey to the people outside of the organization. That is really the organizational culture. Yeah. What is so unique about PepsiCo?
Yeah. I'll give you a couple of stories to illustrate that issue. One is when we were doing a massive SAP implementation, Accenture was our partner. And, we had a whole team from Accenture working with us. And, we're a tough client. And about 6 months into the project, maybe a year into the project, the CEO of Accenture and I would have regular lunches. He said to me, I want to narrate a very interesting story to you. He said, in the first 3 to 4 months, the Accenture consultants who worked with PepsiCo hated working with you guys because you're too tough on all of us. And then I noticed something very interesting. In about 9 months, people who worked on PepsiCo didn't want to leave the PepsiCo assignment. Then a year later, Indra, I'm noticing something else. I have a wait list of people that want to work on the PepsiCo assignment. And I asked them, why is that? You started off saying, I don't want to work with this company, they're too tough. Then you didn't want to leave, now you want to line up to go there. And he said to me, and I quote him, he said, there's something you do to us, you make us better when we work with PepsiCo, because you're so dedicated to the company, you really make us better. And then he said, you have a special sauce. He sort of did this with his fingers and said, there's a special sauce in this company, Indra. Don't ever lose that. And that special sauce is part of the bleeding blue. That's first story, I tell you. The second thing is, anytime you come into PepsiCo, you walk into any of our offices, people are smiling, people are happy. In the worst days, coming to work is a joyous experience. They like the fact that we're transforming the company. They love our brands, how they connect with consumers. They just think that there's a youthfulness when you come into the company. And the fact that we are performance with purpose, doing things for the environment, changing our portfolio, doing wonderful things for farmers, it touches them, not just in the head and hands, but also in the heart. And all of this together is that special sauce. And people don't like to leave PepsiCo once you're there. And I'll tell you one last funny story before you go on. I have a relative who works for American Express. And she always tells me, we've got a lot of ex-PepsiCo people in American Express. The Amex building in New York is a Coke pour. She says all the ex-PepsiCo guys come to work every morning with their own six-pack of Diet Pepsi because they will not drink the red drink because they all bleed blue. They all bleed blue. Once you work in PepsiCo, you're PepsiCo for life.
But then you mentioned something that caught my attention. You said you really see in people who work in PepsiCo, they enjoy being there, but enjoy transforming the company. And that was your role. You became a chief executive in 2006, and you really started to work hard on transforming company. Not for many of us who have similar roles and experiences, we know that transformations do not come easy. How did you manage to mobilize the company and transform it in a way that was really unique, is unique now, and it was much more unique back then when you started your journey?
Now, we were an established, iconic company. We had lots of billion-dollar brands. We were operating in 180 countries. This is a company with tremendous size and scope. But I think if companies look at themselves as being around for decades, not for a few years, decades and decades and decades, you constantly have to look at the outside environment and say, what's changing? And what do I have to do today to reposition the company for the changes that are coming? Because if you try to change just in time, you won't do it well. You'll do it hurriedly, it won't stick. So one of the things we did was we looked at the mega trends that are going to impact PepsiCo. With strategic acuity and foresight, constantly look around the world. What are the mega trends? Now you could identify hundreds of mega trends. We picked the 10 mega trends that are going to impact us. Then we said to ourselves, what is the impact of those mega trends in a company like PepsiCo? What should we do to change ourselves? What kind of moves do we have to make? What kind of people do we need to hire? Once we had that core document, we could now take it to our senior executives and our board of directors and tell them that we had to embark on a program to shift our portfolio. And when I say shift our portfolio, Tom, I'm not saying walking away from our core products. It's the and strategy, not the or strategy. Stay with our products, but add lower calorie options, add healthier options. And then go back and make the fun options great tasting, but less of the bad, less fat, less sugar, less salt. These are major R&D challenges, let me assure you, because you're impacting taste. You've got to be very careful. But our employees looked at this and said, we're keeping the best of the past, but we're creating a new future consistent with the consumer trends. And when we started to talk about all the environmental initiatives we were doing, employees said, look, we understand that we generate a lot of plastic, that we want to create a closed loop is wonderful for our communities. So I think every message in a change management process has to be communicated in a personal way to the employees. There's no point saying PepsiCo is going to transform. Doesn't mean anything. You got to bring it to each country, to each group of people, personalize the message, engage them, engage their hearts and their head, so that they know that this is not a fad, this is a fundamental transformation against which we're going to put people and money over multiple years to create a wonderful PepsiCo that's going to last for many, many more decades. So the whole thing was framed in the context of creating a defining corporation for well into the future. And that motivated all people to be part of the journey.
And it's interesting, you named that concept performance with purpose. And it clearly comes out of everything that you just shared with us, that there is a strong sense of purpose. But just in our brief conversation before this interview, you have also shared with me your passion for health and well-being. We talked a little bit about the challenges in healthcare. And can you speak a little bit about why you're so passionate about wellness, well-being? Because this also reflects on your strategy during your tenure as a CEO of PepsiCo. You really focused on making your products healthier. Why is that important to you?
So I think, in fact, it's become even more front and center for me coming out of COVID. As you know, I was the co-chair of Reopen Connecticut. And Connecticut is one of the healthiest states in the country. It's in the top 5 healthy states. And yet, as I looked at our population and the numbers, we had a large portion of our people, over 35% of the people, had some sort of a comorbidity. And it didn't matter what the age was, they had, a higher risk of getting COVID. So I'm sitting back and saying, if one of the wealthiest states in the country, which is considered one of the healthiest states in the country, with low density of population, with more parks per capita than any other, state in the country, we're a small state, okay, with great quality of life, can have so many people with some sort of a pre-existing condition who have higher risk to COVID. This is not a good thing. It means that we have a population where when they age even more, are going to be prone to even more illnesses. And this may not be the first pandemic. I hope it's the last, but who knows? I don't know. Viruses know no borders. So I look at this and go, we can't spend all our money on curing. Nature's going to force diseases that are going to require cures. But if we can do one thing ourselves, is to prevent. We can change the nature of society, how people walk, how we get people to be more active. We can change the entire food supply. Now, clearly you can't mandate how people should eat and drink, but you can nudge them to better choices. You can make the healthy choice as tasty, as affordable, and as available as the fun choice. So I think mentally we have to start thinking differently, because I don't think we can afford to pay for all the people who are going to get sick if we don't do something about it. So I think it's no longer a nice to do, it's an imperative. And not to impose on anybody's freedoms, I think it's got to be one of those things where we educate, and then nudge people to the right choices.
You're clearly very passionate about the topic, and I can see how you were able to convince all of your colleagues in PepsiCo to follow the lead and do the right thing ultimately.
It's interesting when you start doing the right thing, people fall in line very quickly because they know they're seeing the same trends in their communities and their families.
But there is one advice that you get in the very beginning of your CEO journey, and it's something that I read about that I would like to ask you to reflect a little bit on, and that is the advice that you got from your mother. The day that you got named the CEO, she told you to leave the crown in the garage. What did she mean by that?
For a long time, I've been reflecting on what that meant. There's so many meanings for that. And if I ask my mother now, she looks at me as if to say, what's unusual about it? I think basically what it says is that, when you reach positions of power, when you're economically independent, when you have some fame, whatever, it's very easy to bring that into the house. And what happens is humility goes by the wayside, and you create friction inside the household. And basically she was saying, if you want to balance a family, children, a spouse, with your job, your power, everything, try to park the humility outside in the garage. Now, I have to tell you, a rabbi gave a sermon a few months ago where he reflected back on leaving the crown in the garage and said, even in Judaism, there's a word, I think it's called Toevin, something like that, which talks about humility. And he talks about it's very important that none of us forget humility. Now, I'll give you the flip side. I often ask myself the question, would any mother have told their son to leave the crown in the garage? I don't think so. I think there's still a sort of an asymmetry in the world where the men still have a crown and we women have to leave the crown in the garage. Personally, I don't care. But I think that at some point we're going to have to say men and women may want to leave the crown in the garage, because when you come home, there are other lives to think about besides each other, probably kids, their parents, etc., etc., etc. It would help to get to a little bit more equality there.
Absolutely, absolutely. In particular for the families where both spouses or both partners work, equality is of paramount importance. And I know that you spoke frequently about the challenges of how to get it all done. Is it possible to get it all done, to have a career, to have a family, to have a relationship? How do you think about this? People call it work-life balance. There are all kinds of different phrases that we use to describe the same thing. And this is the challenge about how to govern your own time.
Yeah. So leaving all these words about having it all or not having it all, because there's so many nuances and definitional issues with that. All that I'd say is being a parent is a full-time job. Being an executive or a worker is a full-time job. When you have aging parents, taking care of them is a full-time job. And in the Indian context, being a daughter, daughter-in-law, all of those are full-time jobs. So the day is still 24 hours. And you still have to worry about yourself. You know, there's some personal stuff that you have to worry about so that you're sane. When you try to balance all of them, you can't be perfect at all. So at every time in the day, you're going to have to decide what you're going to do well and what you're going to park on the side. So you have to have conversations with yourself on where are you going to show perfection and where are you not. Now, where the challenge comes about, Tom, is if you aspire to move up a corporate ladder, and if you want to go up the pyramid, it is a pyramid. It narrows enormously. If you want to do that, you're being tracked from the time you come in. And so somehow you've got to move up this pyramid, which narrows. You've got to stick out from every other talent out there. And you've got to balance the work and family at some point. You can't do that without help. You just can't do that. I think there are three things that need to work together, which gets to the crux of my book. It's the care trifecta, if you want to call it that. We have to have paid leave. Baby leave is required. In countries like Canada and Denmark, they give you 1 year's paid leave. That's not the country we are. But we have to consider that everybody who's having a child has at least 12 weeks paid leave. If you marry that with flexible working hours, and for hourly workers, predictable working hours, and outstanding childcare facilities, you can toggle between the three. Think of this as three legs of a stool. You can toggle between the three, and you can enable families to have children and to work away from home. It's important because I think we have extraordinarily smart women in particular in our country today. 70% of high school valedictorians are women. 54% of college degrees are gotten by women. 67% of law degrees, 66% of medicine, MDs are all women. I look at Silicon Valley, 2.3% of VC funding goes to women. In spite of the fact that 47% of engineers who graduate from MIT are women. So clearly what we're saying is we have this extraordinary group of people, but somewhere along the way, the biological clock is upsetting the career clock. So we have to find a way to bring the best and brightest into the workforce, at the same time, allow families to have at least 2.1 kids per family, which is a replacement rate of our population. And the way to do that is to worry about this care trifecta. This is one of the most important things that we as a country have to worry about, because we need the best and brightest working in our economy in order to move the country ahead.
No, I couldn't agree more. I can hardly wait to see the book. When do you think it's going to come out?
It's coming out September 2021.
Oh, good. Wonderful. So obviously you have been able to find the balance that suited you and your family. You raised 2 daughters, but you also found time for your hobbies. Our researchers told us that you have a few secret talents, that you continue to play, electric guitar. They're still interested in cricket and singing. How do you find time to pursue these hobbies? Or are you acquiring new hobbies now when you're not in the COC any longer?
You know, Tom, when my kids were young, there were no hobbies that I had because there was just no time. Because whatever time I had, I gave it to the kids. And so everything that I had as a hobby, I just parked to the side and said, ain't gonna work. Once my kids left the home to go to college or business school or graduate school or working outside the home, clearly I had more time. I don't play cricket. I used to play it when I was in college. I don't play that anymore. I watch Yankees baseball a lot on mute. I read and watch that a lot. I've learned ballroom dancing, which I love. Now with COVID, all that's gone. But I do that all in ridiculous hours. I do it at 7 a.m. when I go for lessons, because that's the only time I have to do something. Beyond that, I just read, I listen to music, I read voraciously. I mean, I'm reading everything I can lay my hands on. So I wish I had, let me put it this way, I can make time to do hobbies, but right now I'm so consumed by all that I can do to pay it forward to society, because society gave me such a positive break. I feel I should pay it back while I'm still energetic. So I'm singularly focused on that right now.
Well, thank you very much. We could keep on having a conversation for a really, really long time, but I would like to turn to some of our audience questions, because quite a few of those who are watching this interview sent us questions ahead of time. The first one goes like this. What was the biggest inspiration that you had during your career at PepsiCo? Who was the person who really inspired you in your professional life?
You know, it's interesting. It's not who inspired me as opposed to what drove me. Let me turn the question around. The reason I say that is because even today, even though I was CEO, I've been in the country for 42 years, I have an immigrant's fear. And the immigrant's fear, and I don't know if you can relate to this, Tom, an immigrant fear is everywhere you go, whatever you take on, you feel you're in the hole. And you have to dig yourself out of the hole before you are able to move forward. So having that immigrant fear, even today, which is surprising, what happens is you start to do things better and better and better, and you strive for a work product that is simply amazing. I'd encourage everybody to read a Martin Luther King speech, which he gave in '63, I think, at the Barat School. It's called, What's Your Life's Blueprint? 6 paragraphs. I read it regularly. It talks about how you should aim to do everything exceedingly well. I remind myself of that speech. I read it regularly because that immigrant's fear drives me to drive for a better and better work product. So really, rather than any person inspiring me, it's that innermost immigrant fear. And in a funny way, even when I came to the country, I always wanted to be viewed as a positive addition to the country, never a liability on the country. I always tell my kids, we have to be positive citizens of the country. And so giving back time, money, contributions, that's been my singular goal. And so that's what really drives me. That's what, constantly keeps me going.
Well, thank you for sharing that. The second question is slightly different, but I believe that you'll be very passionate about answering it. What do you believe are the social responsibilities of large corporations like PepsiCo and the fast food industry or food industry in general?
I think companies like ours that spend a lot of money on marketing, that know how to market, when society changes as it is right now, we have to take a lot of our marketing dollars and put it to work on products that suit the changing society. Now, let me tell you the rub here. Even when I was CEO and I said, let's shift our advertising to more zero-calorie products and healthier products, you have an investor community that basically says, we're not going to wait for the results for 3 to 5 years of your marketing shift. We want it today. And so what you have is this tension between people wanting results today, even if it's not as wonderful as it could be in the future, versus doing what's right for society and the consumer. And so I think that the entire food supply of the country needs to be improved. Processed food overall, which really helped improve shelf life, which helped convenience, now needs to be put to good use to also deliver nutrition. Nutrition without the fun. Great tasting, but nutrition without the negative ingredients, because we've gone from an active society to a sedentary society. So this is again an and game, not an or game. How do you do both? And how do you bring the enormous capabilities of food and beverage companies to bear upon this? Nudge consumers differently by changing the shelf set, change the advertising, change packaging sizes. It can't be mandates. Mandates never work. Taxes are short-term sticks. I think it's got to be, in 2009, I think, in the industry, we formed something called the Healthy Weight Commitment Foundation. As an industry, we promised to take out 1.5 trillion calories from the diet in 5 years in the US. In 3 years, we took out 4 trillion calories. And the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation independently verified it. So this was not the industry self-reporting this reduction. I think we need another campaign of that sort. Remember, Buckle Up worked? Yep. If campaigns can work, I think the time has come for us to use COVID as a great reason to say, how do we change the entire food supply of the country in a positive, incentivized way, as opposed to sticks? A lot more carrots.
Yeah. Well, Indra, thank you so very much for your time. Thank you very much for your wisdom that you shared with us. And thank you for everything that you do for our broader society. It was an absolutely wonderful conversation. So once again, on behalf of all of us here at Cleveland Clinic and our viewership, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Very nice to talk to you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And my thanks to all of you for joining us. Don't miss our next Virtual Ideas for Tomorrow on December 2nd. Our guest will be Melody Hobson, co-CEO and president of Ariel Investments and an authority on financial literacy. Please make a note to join us. Take care and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you very much.